So I rewatched this movie the other day and I thought I'd talk about it because this is a movie I've been trying to get to the bottom of for years and I've still never managed it. So let's take another look at it. Rango, the 2010 animated kids movie made by Gore Verbinski and starring Johnny Depp. So, the plot. How the hell am I going to explain this? Well, let's just try and start from the beginning. Rango is a chameleon who seems to lack a sense of self-identity, likely due to the fact that he spent his whole life in a tank with no one to talk to but himself. One day on a road trip, he falls out of his tank and into the Mojave Desert in Nevada. Eventually, after some wandering, he comes across a town, which is styled on an old western town, full of other anthropomorphic creatures called Dirt. He decides he's going to try and have the identity of a tough western legend, and through some boasting of some feats that he didn't actually do, he wins the town's favour and after a lucky altercation with a hawk, becomes the town sheriff. But he's got a mystery to figure out about missing water, since the town uses water as its currency and it's gradually running out, and finds out that the mayor might have more to do with it than he's letting on. So the movie sounds initially like it has a simple plot, but this movie is a lot more complicated than it lets on. It is very psychological and has so many layers to it, which you would not initially think of considering it's a kids' animated movie. But this is actually harder to figure out than some Stanley Kubrick movies that I've seen. The big epicenter of the movie is Rango and his sense of self-identity, the fact that he seems to have no sense of personality or persona, and he's constantly trying to find who he is, and eventually he finds persona that seems to work for him, but it's caught out by the fact that he's lying about things that he hasn't actually done, and it ends up getting him into trouble. It's definitely a very unique story. We've done the whole liar revealed story in kids' movies before, but this does it in a very different way. It's not necessarily like, say, Chicken Run, where even though that movie did it relatively well, it was still done in a very typical way. This one does it in a way where, even though he's lying, it's not like the movie is kind of punishing him or at least looking down on him for lying. He definitely gets caught out many times, but it's not as if he's doing something that the movie perceives as wrong. It's hard to pin down exactly what the movie is trying to say. However, I will admit that within recent years, I think this movie actually might have been touching on things that back then we didn't think much of, but now have become very poignant discussion points. In recent years, we have, as a society, looked more into examining our own self-persona and whether or not how we were brought up or how we perceive ourselves to be is really who we are, through sexual identity, gender identity, or even just who we present ourselves as to the world. It's definitely something that's become a very poignant thing. And I think this movie was actually touching on that in a way that a lot of people didn't realize at the time. Hell, even I didn't realize it. But it is kind of getting into this idea of, is the way we think ourselves to be from how we were perceived to be brought up really who we are? Or is the way we are formed from our environment who we are? Or are we who we decide who we want to be is our true selves? It's very deep, and I actually kind of like how the movie doesn't give us a concrete answer, because in a way, this is a question that doesn't have a concrete answer. And that's actually quite clever. Like I said, it does make the movie very confusing and hard to follow, and even though it does touch upon these elements, it's not like it's a full examination of it, but it is still a kids' movie, and I think for a kids' movie they handled it pretty well. And I think the best moment of it is a part near the end where Rango, after, of course, being ousted as being someone who he's not who he says he is, comes across a Clint Eastwood-style figure, who of course is not actually played by Clint Eastwood, sadly, but the guy who did play him did a decent job. And he talks about how he wants to run away from the story he's created, but Clint tells him that no one can run away from their own story, even if it's a story that they themselves created. Again, it's very vague, but it is something that definitely touches you in a way where it does make you think a bit. Again, very confusing, but it is a movie that kind of makes you think about yourself, and it's weird in that regard, but I do kind of like it because of that. There is also sort of a second message going on, which is a lot more of an identifiable one, which is about the idea of how progress is a dirty word and we should stick to the old ways, which is kind of an ironic message to take when the other message is about looking at yourself in a way that you wouldn't perceive before, which is a very progressive thing. But yeah, it's a bit of a weird message. It's kind of similar to the thing that Red Dead Redemption games do about the idea of the old ways are best, and moving on with the future is corrupt and it makes us lose who we are. And to be fair, it's not a bad message, but it's a bit of a difficult message to do because, again, similar to Red Dead Redemption, you're doing it in a Wild West setting where eventually progress did take hold and those old ways are now dead. Admittedly, this isn't really the Old West, it's a mock Old West town set in the modern day, but still, I think it still has that same flaw. But to be fair, the movie doesn't focus that much on that part of the movie, it's more just a catalyst to move the plot forward. The cast of this movie do a really good job, and not just in their voice acting. See, this movie was made in a very unique way, which I don't think has actually ever been repeated since, in that when the actors were doing their lines, they were also physically acting out the actions that their animated counterparts would be doing in the movie, and then they were used as references for the actual animation. It wasn't motion capture, they were just using it as references, so it's still pure animation, just with something to help guide you along. Now, to be fair, this isn't the first time this has been done. Disney have done it pretty much ever since they started. But they only use it for specific scenes, such as with using Bela Lugosi as a reference for Chernobog in the Night on Bald Mountain scene in Fantasia, or using an actress as a reference for Ariel and Belle in The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast respectively. But again, they were only for specific moments, like the part of your world scene. This movie, pretty much everything was acted out with the physical actors and then animated into the movie. And it's a very unique way to make a movie. Granted, the result of that meant that this movie was insanely expensive to make, and as a result, it didn't really make much of its money back. I wouldn't say it was a bomb, but it definitely made it a movie that was difficult to make a profit on. But the result of that, the animation is amazing. The motion is so much like real life, but the designs are so unlike real life. It's a very surreal thing, and it definitely adds to that very strange element of the movie combined with its message. But it does look really nice to look at, and to be fair, despite it being set in a grim old western town, it's not devoid of colour. There definitely are some bright elements in the movie, but they use at appropriate times to sort of emphasise the colour, which works really well. In terms of the vocal performances, Johnny Depp does a good job as Rango. His role before he becomes the sheriff is very similar to his role in Benny and June, except this time he speaks. But when he becomes the sheriff, it's a role that we've not really seen him do before. This guy who thinks he's a lot cooler and tougher than he is, but he kind of falls over on that, but he never really lets on that he knows that he's made a mistake. It's kind of interesting, and it's also really clever that he plays a chameleon because his eyes are massive and his mouth is tiny, which is kind of a spoof on how he kind of physically makes him look in his movies, where he has big eyes and a closed mouth, which he kind of purses up. That's actually kind of clever and funny. Ilsa Fisher plays the love interest Beans, who is very entertaining in just how stubborn she is, and how she has that typical freezing motion that some lizards do when they feel scared, and they incorporate that very well, and it's very funny. And Bill Nighy plays the villain Jake the Snake, who, this is probably his best performance I've ever seen in him. I love Bill Nighy in anything, but this movie is really where he got a chance to shine, because he does this amazingly good American Southern accent, which I never thought was possible from him, but he does it amazingly well. And when you watch him do the physical capturing for the movie, he really gets into it, which is tricky to do because he's playing a snake. It's one of the most difficult kind of creatures to anthropomorphize without making it look not like a snake or not like a human. But he does it amazingly well, and they animate him beautifully. It's definitely my favourite performance he's ever done. And even genuine old western movie legend Harry Dean Stanton has a cameo in there. The music is also great. They use mariachi music, which is very appropriate considering it's set in Nevada. And the combination of traditional instruments combined with more modern instruments like electric guitars really works well, and it really sets the mood and really gets you excited. I love it. Overall, this is a movie that I like a lot, but I'm still not 100% sure what to think of it. You could probably analyse it for days and never truly get to the bottom of it. But it is still very entertaining, and it does definitely make you think about things that you probably never thought of before. The performances are very entertaining, it visually looks incredible, it sounds great, and I'm surprised it didn't make a sequel of some kind. I know I said it didn't make much of its money back, but a TV series spin-off with 2D animation would have been really cool to see, sort of like a Lucky Luke but with animals. That would have been amazing. But as it is, it's a standalone movie that has gained a big cult following, and I can certainly understand why. So I recommend you check it out just to see what you'll think of it. But I won't guarantee that you'll like it, but you'll definitely see something that is unlike anything you've ever seen before. But let's see what I find when I ride off into the sunset next time.